Your grocery bill is 30% higher than 3 years ago. Your rent went up again. Your savings account pays interest that doesn't even cover half of inflation. You feel poorer because you are poorer. But here's what they're not telling you. This isn't random. This isn't just market forces or supply chain disruptions or corporate greed. There's a pattern behind every major economic disaster of the last 40 years. And at the center of that pattern stands one person whose decisions literally rewrote how money works in the modern world. Watch this carefully. In 2008, the global financial system nearly collapsed. Banks that had existed for over a century disappeared in weeks. $15 trillion in wealth evaporated. Millions lost their homes. Now rewind to 2000. The dot-com bubble burst and trillions vanished overnight as tech stocks crashed. Go back further to 1998. Long-term capital management, a hedge fund so sophisticated it had 2 Nobel Prize winners on staff, imploded and almost took down Wall Street with it. Jump back to 1987. Black Monday. The stock market crashed harder in a single day than it did during the start of the Great Depression. 4 different decades. 4 massive crises. Unrelated disasters, right? That's what the textbooks say. That's what the news tells you. But pull back the curtain and you'll find the same fingerprints on every single one. The same philosophy. The same policy decisions. The same belief system driving the bus straight toward each cliff edge. Here's where it gets interesting. Take the decision-making pattern from 2008 and overlay it with 1998. They match. Now add the policy framework from 2000 and compare it to 1987. Identical DNA. It's like looking at crime scenes across decades and finding the same signature every time. Not because someone planned these disasters, but because the same ideology kept recreating the conditions that made them inevitable. This isn't about conspiracy theories or secret cabals. This is documented history that Wall Street would prefer you didn't connect. Because once you see the pattern, once you understand how the system actually works, you can't be fooled by the narratives they spin every time the next crisis hits. One person sat at the controls of the most powerful economic institution on earth for 19 years. 19 years of decisions that built the architecture of modern financial instability. This person wasn't a villain in the traditional sense. No corruption charges. No insider trading scandals. This was something far more dangerous. Ideological certainty meeting unlimited power. A true believer who thought he was saving capitalism while actually building the machine that keeps breaking it. The crashes you've lived through, the inflation eating your paycheck right now, the next crisis that's already forming but hasn't hit the headlines yet, they all trace back to decisions made in wood-paneled conference rooms by someone who believed with absolute conviction that he was right. And when the whole thing collapsed in 2008, when the ideology met reality and reality won, this person sat before Congress and admitted something remarkable. I was wrong. But by then, the system was already built. The culture was already set. The doctrine was already embedded so deep into the financial infrastructure that even after the architect admitted his mistake, the machine kept running on the same programming. You've been living inside that machine your entire adult life. Every financial decision you've made, every dollar you've saved or invested or borrowed, has been shaped by rules written by someone you probably couldn't pick out of a lineup. And those rules are still in effect right now, creating the conditions for the next disaster, while everyone pretends we fixed the problems from the last one. The Federal Reserve controls interest rates, which means it controls the cost of money itself. When money is cheap, people borrow and spend and take risks. When money is expensive, everything contracts. The person who ran the Fed for nearly 2 decades believed that markets would regulate themselves. That if you just gave capitalism enough freedom, enough deregulation, enough room to breathe, it would naturally find equilibrium. Greed would never override self-preservation because destroying yourself isn't profitable. Sounds logical, right? Rational actors making rational decisions. The invisible hand guiding everything toward efficiency. Beautiful theory. One problem. Humans aren't rational, especially not when there is a fortune to be made, and someone else will pay the price when it all falls apart. This banker watched the first crisis unfold just days after taking office in 1987. Markets were in free fall. Panic was spreading. The system was seizing up. And in that moment, a decision was made that would echo through every crisis that followed. Instead of letting the pain play out, instead of allowing bad bets to fail, and teaching the market a lesson about risk, the Fed opened the floodgates. Unlimited liquidity. Whatever you need to keep the system alive. We'll worry about consequences later. The market stabilized. Crisis averted. Everyone celebrated the brilliant rescue. But something fundamental changed that day. A new precedent was set. A promise was made, never spoken out loud, but understood by every trader and banker and investor on Wall Street. Take any risk you want, because if it goes bad, the Fed will catch you. That moral hazard, that implicit guarantee, became the operating system of modern finance. It has a name now. They call it the Greenspan put. A put option is financial insurance. It guarantees you can sell something at a set price, no matter how far it falls. Alan Greenspan turned the entire Federal Reserve into a put option for Wall Street. Fall as far as you want, we'll buy you out at the bottom. So what did Wall Street do with that guarantee? Exactly what any rational actor would do. They took bigger risks, packaged them in more complex ways, leveraged them higher, sold them wider, because why wouldn't you? The profits are yours when it works. The losses are socialized when it doesn't. Heads you win, tails the taxpayer loses. Greenspan didn't invent greed. He didn't create fraud. What he did was far more systemic. He built an architecture that made catastrophic risk-taking not just possible, but profitable and rational. He removed the natural brake that fear provides. And once that brake was gone, the machine could only accelerate toward the inevitable crash.
Before we go further, you need to understand where this ideology came from, because Alan Greenspan didn't wake up one day and decide to restructure global finance on a whim. His beliefs were forged decades earlier in an apartment on East 34th Street in Manhattan, in a salon run by one of the most controversial philosophers of the 20th century. Her name was Ayn Rand, novelist, philosopher, prophet of radical capitalism. In the 1950s and 60s, she gathered a circle of young intellectuals who called themselves the Collective. They met regularly to discuss her philosophy of objectivism, the idea that rational self-interest is the highest moral good, that capitalism is the only moral economic system, and that government interference in markets is inherently destructive. Young Alan Greenspan was one of her most devoted disciples. He contributed essays to her newsletters. She attended his wedding. He absorbed her worldview so completely that even decades later, after running the most powerful government institution in the financial world, he still saw himself as a free market purist trapped in a regulator's chair. Think about the irony for a moment. The man who controlled interest rates for the entire American economy, who had more power over markets than anyone else on earth, believed that such power shouldn't exist. He was the ultimate regulator who thought regulation was evil, the central planner who preached against central planning. That contradiction didn't resolve itself. It expressed itself in policy that tried to have it both ways. Use government power to protect capitalism from itself, while insisting capitalism does not need protection. Three pillars held up the Greenspan doctrine. Understand these and you understand everything that's happened since. The first pillar, the self-regulating market. Greenspan believed with religious conviction that banks and financial institutions would never take catastrophic risks because destroying yourself is unprofitable. If you're playing with your own money, your own survival, you'll be careful. Self-interest equals self-preservation. The market would naturally police itself through the cold mathematics of profit and loss. Beautiful theory. It fell apart the moment you introduced other people's money into the equation. When you can gamble with deposits, with pension funds, with money that isn't yours. When you can collect massive bonuses on short-term gains while someone else absorbs the long-term losses, self-interest suddenly means something very different. It means take the biggest risk possible, pocket the reward, and disappear before the bill comes due. Greenspan dismissed these concerns. He believed that reputation would keep institutions honest, that banks valued their long-term survival too much to jeopardize it for short-term gain. He actually said this to Congress in 1998 when warned about derivatives risks. I believe that the self-interest of lending institutions to protect shareholders' equity is their most important protection. 10 years later, every major investment bank was either bankrupt, bailed out, or forcibly merged to prevent collapse. Self-interest didn't protect them. It destroyed them. Because in a system with implicit guarantees and socialized losses, self-interest means maximize risk and externalize consequences. The second pillar, derivatives as tools of stability. In the 1990s, a new financial technology emerged. Derivatives, contracts whose value derives from something else. Options, swaps, collateralized debt obligations, incredibly complex instruments that could slice and repackage and redistribute risk in ways never before possible. Greenspan saw derivatives as the apex of market evolution. They let banks hedge risk, spread exposure, create liquidity in new markets. If one bank was overexposed to mortgages, they could sell that risk to another bank through a derivative. Risk would flow to whoever could bear it best. The system would become more stable because risk would be distributed instead of concentrated. One person tried to stop this. Her name was Brooksley Born, chair of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. In 1998, she proposed regulating the derivatives market. Just basic oversight, transparency requirements. Know who's holding what risk. Simple stuff. Greenspan crushed her, publicly opposed her proposal, lobbied Congress to strip her agency of authority, told lawmakers that regulating derivatives would harm markets and reduce efficiency. Born was eventually forced out. The derivatives market exploded in size with zero oversight. By 2008, the derivatives market was worth over $600 trillion. 600 trillion in contracts, many of them interconnected in ways nobody fully understood. When the housing market collapsed, these derivatives transmitted the damage through the entire global system like a financial pandemic. The tools of stability became weapons of mass destruction. The third pillar, the Greenspan put. We've touched on this already, but you need to understand how it evolved. After rescuing markets in 1987, Greenspan did it again in 1998 with long-term capital management, again in 2000 after the dot-com crash. Each time, the same pattern. Crisis emerges, Fed floods the system with cheap money, crisis stabilizes, everyone moves on. But each rescue made the next crisis bigger, because each rescue taught the market that there was no real downside to extreme risk. Why invest conservatively when aggressive strategies pay better and the Fed guarantees a bailout if things go wrong? The rational move became taking irrational risks. By the 2000s, this was fully embedded culture. Leverage ratios that would have been considered insane in previous decades became standard. Banks operated with 30-to-1 leverage, meaning every dollar of actual capital supported $30 of bets. One bad move wipes out everything. But nobody worried because everyone knew the Fed would intervene before total collapse. Greenspan saw himself as the guardian of capitalism. In reality, he became the enabler of a casino economy where the house always wins and the players never truly lose because someone else covers the bad bets. That's not capitalism. That's something else entirely. Socialism for the rich. Capitalism for everyone else.